Good evening, Marcy. Hey, Marcy, can you hear me? You're on mute.
Hi, Nancy.
Hello.
Hey, Marcy. Did you get in?
She's muted.
Okay. She was having problems. She sent an email.
Okay, yeah.
Hopefully she can get on.
She's on, and I'm asking her to unmute, but I think she's having difficulty.
Okay.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Oh, we can.
Oh,
Perfect.
here I am.
Yay.
Hi, everyone.
Hey, Marcy. Have you not been feeling well?
No,
Oh.
Oh, I'm sorry.
that's okay. It's not your fault, I don't think.
I
Maybe
haven't
it
seen
is.
you.
Then I can blame someone for not feeling good.
I haven't seen you in quite some time, so I don't think so. Okay, so Janice Brown is in there, but she's not on the committee that I know of. I tried to look.
No.
Okay.
Mm-mm.
Okay, Felicia, I tried to go ahead and look at all the members. So let me get Felicia in.
So I'm just going to mute myself for a minute. Is that okay?
Oh, of course.
Okay.
Hi, everybody.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep.
Good evening.
Hi, Steve.
Hi.
Christine. Felicia.
This is Brenda. Can you hear me? I'm just testing.
Yeah, we can hear you, Brenda.
Woohoo. Okay, then I'll start my
So could the person who is identified as me, ME, unmute, and please tell me if you're a member of the commission?
Does that help?
Oh, you're good, Marcy. I've got somebody on here that's ME. They don't have their name.
Okay.
You're good. Okay.
Is my speaker working okay?
Yes.
Yep.
Thanks.
Nancy, are you our clerk for the evening?
I'm just letting everybody in, and then I believe Maria is going to become the host. But yep, here's Carson.
Yeah, so I'll do the roll and the any votes we had tonight, Steve.
Thank you.
Okay.
So it's 6:01 and we have 8 members present. I think we can go ahead and begin the meeting.
Okay. Let me find Maria real quick. Okay, Maria is now the host. Have a wonderful meeting, everyone.
Good evening. This is a meeting of the Organized Residential Waste and Recycling Collection Citizens Committee. It is Tuesday, February 23rd at 6:02 p.m. I'm Stephen Ward, Chair of this committee. We'll begin with the roll.
All right, Chair Ward,
Present.
Vice Chair Green,
Present.
Member Frazier, Member Brinker,
Here.
Member Borman,
Here.
Member Brown,
Here.
Member Labe, here, Member Hubka,
Here.
and Member Kawanabe. Not present. Chair Ward, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Director DeAndrea. Ordinarily, minutes will be the next item of business. However, I do not see that appearing on our agenda, so I assume the minutes from our last meeting have not been prepared, which brings us to our next order of business, public comment. We have one individual, 2 individuals so far with their names raised. The first public comment I'll call is Janice Brown. Just a couple of notes before public comment begins. Public comment is restricted to 3 minutes. The clerk will keep time and give you a 1-minute warning. You can also submit written public comment to this committee. The email address for that appears on each of our notices. Jan. Please go ahead.
Can you hear me? Okay. I attended all 3 of the town hall conferences that were held on single hauler trash in 2019. Most of the people sitting near me wanted to at least give single hauler trash a try. As a nurse, one of the reasons I support single hauler trash is because of air pollution. With 4 different trash companies, that means 4 times the air pollution per week to pick up trash. There is no safe level of air pollution. Short-term exposure will have cumulative effects. One of the air pollutants most concerning is called particulate matter. Particulate matter of 10 micrometers in diameter is visible, such as dust. Particulate matter of 2.5 micrometers or smaller is called fine particulate matter. There are studies being done on ultrafine particulate matter smaller than 0.1 microns, and the results are quite alarming. Particulate matter is created from the streets with heavy trucks driving up and down, also from the truck tires as particles break off, and from fuel used by the trucks. Ultrafine particulate matter can be inhaled deep into the lungs, where it is picked up by blood circulating and is then carried to all the organs of the body, embedding in your heart, brain, kidneys, liver, blood vessels. Like I said, it can have an accumulative effect, such as forming plaques in your blood vessels or in your heart. It can also result in kidney failure and liver failure. Air pollution is also a precursor to being infected with coronavirus and can contribute to the serious impact of the disease. Autopsies done on the very young, including infants, show particulate matter accumulating in most of their organs. At one of the town halls, a citizen praised the use of liquid natural gas to fuel the trucks as a clean source of energy. It is not. Liquid natural gas is mostly methane, which is 84 times more potent as a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. Our trash trucks are contributing to the formation of ozone air pollution, as all forms of transportation that use fossil fuels do. Ozone contributes to all diseases that result in death. In general, a trash truck equals 1,000 cars per day on the roads. Thank you for the opportunity to give public comment.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. Does the committee have any questions for Ms. Brown? I see Marcy, you have your hand raised. Please go ahead.
Yes, Ms. Brown, I would just like to ask you these particulate, am I pronouncing that right? Particulate matters, are they only found in trash haulers or the result of trash haulers?
No, they're found in all air pollution. They're found from wildfires. They're found from anything that causes air pollution. That's what the ultrafine particulate matter is.
Thank you.
I don't see any additional hands raised. We have one other individual who wants to give public comment. Kate Bailey.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Thank you for having me. My name is Kate Bailey. I work with EcoCycle, the Policy and Research Director, and I wanted to speak in favor of the proposed waste hauling and recycling contract and share some experiences that we've had in other communities around the Front Range. EcoCycle is based in Boulder, and we have been running recycling operations and collections for 45 years now. So we are well rooted in the business. And in the last decade or so, we've had a lot of experience with cities moving toward these types of contracts, both in Louisville, Lafayette, Lakewood, and most recently in Arvada, where we worked with them as a technical consultant on the city's project. So I understand that this is a great concept, and it's also complicated sometimes in the details. So just wanted to offer, I like to think of it as much as it's a competitive bidding process, I like to think of it as a partnership. It's really about understanding the needs of the haulers and what impacts their costs, and then what's important to your community. And it can be very tempting to develop, the master wish list of everything you'd like to see in the program, but I think really important to work with the haulers, meeting with them individually is a great place to start, and really understanding how the different choices you make in the RFP will change the costs. So for example, having both curbside and alley collection may seem like a small issue, but has very large cost implications in terms of the number of trucks that the haulers have to run. Composting is another program that we would love to see more of, but our infrastructure is lacking. So it's again something about finding the right balance of cost and services for the community. So again, just sort of more working with partnership with the haulers. I also wanted to underscore the importance of pay-as-you-throw program or the volume-based pricing, both from a cost and a recycling perspective. It is definitely proven across the country to improve waste diversion and increase recycling. But what I think is really attractive for cities is that it allows you to offer a very low cost alternative in the program. So in Arvada, we were able to get the cost as low as $11 for that initial smallest cart. And then lastly, I wanted to just mention, I know the minimum service fee or the opt-out is often the most controversial piece of the puzzle, and unfortunately is fundamental to the economics of making this program work from the hauler perspective. Every household contributes, and therefore you're able to get the best rates as the community as a whole. So in summary, these types of citywide contracts for organized waste and recycling have been highly successful across Colorado, and I look forward to Englewood implementing this policy. These services, this type of contract is actually used by 70% of cities across the US, either have municipally run trucks or this type of program. So it is absolutely proven policy across the US, and I fully support your efforts and would also encourage you to look to the Front Range Waste Diversion Fund for funding to stand behind your efforts as well. So thank you for your time.
Vice Chair Green.
Hello, Ms. Bailey. Thanks for presenting. Can you tell us more about what is EcoCycle?
Sure. We are a nonprofit recycling organization. We started actually the first curbside recycling program in Colorado back in 1976, and we have been in the business of recycling since then. We operate a materials recovery facility, or a MRF, where curbside recyclables come, and then we break them up into the cardboard, the aluminum, plastic bottles, and we sell them to markets. We also run a fleet of trucks, collect recycling from businesses. All of our services are just based in Boulder County. And then we provide a lot of advocacy, education, and consulting services around the state. We wrote the State of Recycling in Colorado report that looks at statewide recycling rates and work on statewide policy. So we are, like I said, a Boulder County service provider, but we do help to advocate for recycling across the state.
And where do you live?
I live in Lafayette.
And I missed the details on what you said about Arvada, the $12 minimum cost. What did that include?
So Arvada has a volume-based pricing structure. So they have a 32, a 64, and a 96-gallon cart. The smallest size cart, the 32-gallon cart, is about $11. So I like that pay-as-you-throw program because for a lot of people, $11 is going to be cheaper than what they're paying now, substantially cheaper. We found a lot of people in Arvada were paying $25 or $30 for trash and recycling, and now we'll get that service for as low as $11 if they choose the smallest cart. So find that to be a great option for seniors, those on a fixed income, those who are just good recyclers. So that was, just wanted to talk a little bit about that.
Thank you. And we had a couple questions that I'm not sure what our latest is, but in regard to the structure of Boulder, it sounds like you know quite a bit about that. So you guys are providing recycling for Boulder? Is that for the municipality or just portions of it, businesses, or what do you know about that?
Sure, happy to talk about Boulder. EcoCycle just provides commercial services. So we just pick up recycling from businesses throughout Boulder County. The city of Boulder does require that all residents have recycling. They do that through a city ordinance that requires any hauler who operates in the city to provide recycling and composting collection. This is a little different than the contract approach that Englewood is pursuing. Boulder and Fort Collins are the only two cities in the state that have this type of ordinance. And unfortunately, one of the side effects of the ordinance is it doesn't have the competitive bidding process that a citywide contract has. So Boulder and Fort Collins pay the highest rates for trash and recycling services of any cities across the state. So if we compare Boulder, who has a city ordinance, to a city like Lafayette or Louisville that has a citywide contract, residents in Lafayette and Louisville are getting a much better deal on their trash services.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Jeff, you're next.
Oh, sorry, was that me?
Yes, Member Frazier.
Oh, thank you for joining us, Miss Bailey. There's been a lot of developments, it seems, over the last several years as far as recycling, whether it be the China embargo or a lot of problems or fraud or waste or not recycling things that should be recycled. I'm wondering if, as an expert in the field, if you can kind of update us on the state of recycling in Colorado and perhaps any additional improvements going forward. And you know, this committee is really trying to determine whether recycling is a good thing to pursue to divert waste throughout the community, because from what we can tell, we have a fairly low recycling rate.
Sure, that's a great question. You've all seen recycling in the news the last few years, and it definitely has not been the best of news that's been covered on it. So I could certainly talk at length about some of the problems that recycling has faced, but I'll try to keep it brief. One point I want to make is to the efficacy. So the majority of what you put in your curbside bin is very easily recycled. And there has been a lot of attention on some of the challenges of recycling plastics, but I want to emphasize that plastics are really a small portion of the recycling stream. So in our recycling facility in Boulder County, plastics are only about 7% of our inbound material. So we're recycling a lot of cardboard, paper, metal, glass, and very well recycling plastic bottles. So you think about your soda bottles, your milk jugs, those are very recyclable. That being said, there are a lot of types of plastic packaging that are not recyclable. And that's where there's been a lot of challenges. There's been some fishy things going on, especially with exports to China. But I want to sort of, understand that those problems with plastics are not reflective of problems with recycling overall. In general, recycling has struggled the past few years. We do depend on the sale of materials to make revenue, and we have seen historic 25-year lows. And we've seen a lot of problems that have built up over the decades, and China was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back, if you will. But what we are seeing now as a result is really unprecedented investment in recycling systems, recycling infrastructure, recycling policy across the country. It is definitely something that communities, governments, businesses are turning toward, not turning away from en masse. And so we are seeing great investments like the Front Range Waste Diversion grant fund here in Colorado to really drive more communities to invest in recycling. Colorado as a whole, you've probably heard, we're terrible at recycling because we don't make it convenient for residents. Recycling really has to be as convenient as trash service. So this type of program where every resident has a recycling cart next to their trash cart is pivotal to improving recycling rates across the state. So again, I could easily give a couple-hour webinar on the challenges and status of recycling, but I'll leave it at that.
Understood. And could you perhaps just elaborate very briefly on the Front Range Waste Diversion Grant Program? Apologize for my baby in the background.
Yeah, so we worked extensively to help pass that policy a couple of years ago. It targets just the Front Range, which of course includes Englewood, includes about 85% of the population in Colorado, and as a result, about 85% of our waste stream. And what it did was it added a small fee to our trash. It ended up to be about $2 per ton on the trash that we send to landfills, and that money is earmarked for improving recycling, composting, and waste diversion programs in Front Range communities. It's one of its fundamental goals at the start of this grant fund is to improve curbside recycling and access for Front Range residents to recycling. So this type of initiative that Englewood is pursuing is right on the mark for the type of thing that Forward would like to be funding, would like to be encouraging. They did give $500,000 to the city of Arvada recently to help purchase recycling carts to help roll out their program. So that helped reduce the cost to residents. It is available for education funding, infrastructure. It can pay for some staff time. It's a pretty robust fund. It's going to be a couple $1 million a year. And once it hits its max is going to be about $10 million a year. So great to keep in mind for this project, as well as, you know, any future recycling and waste diversion initiatives in Englewood or the surrounding area.
Thank you so much. You have a wealth of knowledge on this. We may be pinging you for other questions in the future. Thank you for joining us.
Sure thing.
Member Brown, Marcy.
Hi, Miss Bailey. Thank you for coming tonight and speaking. You are a wealth of information. My question is I have been following Arvada pretty closely these past few months. Can you tell me how the citizens welcome the idea of a single trash hauler?
Great question, Mercy. I always caution communities that trash is more controversial than you would have expected. For something that people are paying to people are paying for this to go away. And yeah, it's always surprising how much trash and recycling create more controversy than one would have expected. And, you know, we've seen that play out for a number of years, right? We've seen Lafayette and Louisville were some of the first communities to adopt these programs back in 2007. So we've got nearly 15 years under our belt of watching these programs in place. Generally, change is hard, right? And trash service changing it's a change, and that's what it is. And so it's difficult the first couple months, you know, going through the RFP process has its challenges. When the carts first hit the street and everybody's adjusting to the new day and the new cart and all that stuff, you know, it's challenging. There's a lot of complaints. And so what we see after the first few months of folks enjoying the program is that they appreciate the lower costs, they appreciate the trucks off the street, they appreciate often the extra services like bulky item collection, yard waste collection, and they just adjust to this way of doing things. And as I mentioned, 70% of the country does it this way. And so when I speak around the country and I talk about what's happening in Colorado, they just kind of look at me funny, like, whoa, we just have this kind of trash service for decades in other places. So, you know, we do have a fair amount of controversy around it. I would also say that, however, what we tend to see is it's a very vocal minority. It definitely doesn't, we see surveys across different Front Range cities that the majority of residents support this type of program. They resonate with better recycling, reduced air pollution, reduced truck traffic. But those in opposition do tend to be quite loud, and they do also tend to be quite angry, which makes it seem like a bigger segment of the population than it typically is. So hope that helped answer your question.
Thank you.
I do not see any additional hands raised. So with that, we'll conclude the public comment portion of our meeting. I do just have one question regarding the agenda, Director DeAndrea. The new business looks like it may actually be time sensitive. Is it possible that we could handle that before we move on to the old business?
Absolutely. I also wanted to just note that member Quannaby joined at 6:06 PM.
Thank you for that. I see you have your hand raised, so go ahead. You have the floor.
That's all I was going to say, so I'll lower that.
All right. So under new business, we had some information that was forwarded to us from Member Fraser regarding potential grant opportunities.
Mhm.
So I did see some of those, and I know that they're time sensitive and that there's a process for applying for and receiving grants. So I guess before we get too deep into it, I do have to ask from a logistics standpoint if it's feasible for Inglewood to apply for these grants.
I have looked at it, the one that's due on March 1st. I think the question is, I think it is doable. I just don't know what we would apply for at this time. So because we're still trying to flesh out what our program entails, you know, like Ms. Bailey mentioned, and I think we talked about this before, that Arvada was able to obtain funding for their recycling bins. Currently, the RFP requires that the hauler provide both the garbage and the recycling bins, just as an example. So if we wanted to change routes like that, but the elements that go with that are then managing those carts. So even if we were successful with the grant, then we would likely need additional staff space at the service center to manage those. So I think it's a larger policy question than just using that one as an example. But if there were other ideas, I thought we could talk about that tonight and then consider the other grant, which I think is due later in the month of March.
Sounds great. So I'll give the floor to Member Fraser, who submitted this information to the committee, and perhaps you can elaborate on your thoughts relative to the grant funding, Jeff.
Yeah, I learned about it last week. And obviously we're at a point in our process where we're not we haven't selected a hauler or anything like that. I think it may be worth reaching out to some of the administrators of these grants to determine, if we applied now, and then if we didn't go forward with, any single hauler program potentially, can we work with you on that? It's just, if we were to go forward and leave, Arvada got, I think it was a staggering sum of $500,000. And Ms. Bailey shared that this fund is going to be as high as $10 million, that if we do decide to go forward and get good bids, a grant like that could massively offset some of the costs here, and also could fund some of the other things we're talking about, like education programs, perhaps even a low income assistance. I'd have to look at the specifics of the grants, but I'd be more than happy to volunteer to reach out and just to inquire about, is it possible for a municipality in our position that has made no firm determination one way or another, and maybe they say no, and if we get farther along in the process, maybe there'd be an opportunity to apply at the next grant deadline, perhaps, which I don't know if it's annual or I'd have to check on that. But I did see it, and then saw these deadlines coming up of March 1st and March 15th, and said we gotta at least look at this.
So I have one other question relative to that, Director DeAndrea. I think this would probably be in your wheelhouse. Relative to grants and grant funding, at what point is consent of the council required?
Yeah, we've talked a little bit about that internally. Staff has moved forward with grants before. So typically the way that a grant works is once you receive, let's say we're successful in a grant, and if there's a matching requirement, let's say from the city, then we would go back to council at that time. So we wouldn't accept the grant until there's consensus or approval from the council to commit those matching funds. And that's kind of the trigger for that. So we have been moving forward with grant applications subject to that condition if we get them.
And the second question I have, which we may not actually have enough time to investigate, is whether or not this is actually something that falls in this committee's jurisdiction. You know, we have a fairly strict charter, as I understand it, which is to investigate single haulers, and I'm not sure how this. Well, I guess it's somewhat connected, but directly connected to that particular question, whether or not we should even be meddling around in that.
Well, I think it's good, a good suggestion. We've heard it from citizens have contacted us too about it. At least one has reached out to Mayor Pro Tem Sierra, who passed that on to me. So I think we're, as staff, we're certainly investigating this, and if it's applicable, then we will likely put something in for the March 15th one, if only maybe education around this topic for our community.
Jeff, did you have anything to add? Your hand's still raised.
Yeah, I actually took it down, then re-raised it just because I'm getting real fancy over here now. My point was on the grants. You know, the part of the committee's purview is, as I understand it, to make recommendations to council. And even one of those recommendations, if we were to move forward, you know, to me, it all comes down to what comes back in the bids, but could be to explore and apply for these grants before rolling out any new potential program to offset costs, get education funding, whatever it may be. I don't necessarily know if it would be within our committee's purview, probably not to apply for a grant, but definitely to be a part of the discussion when we're discussing costs and education and a potential single hauler program as a whole.
So I don't necessarily know that we as a committee need to, this is an item that we need to vote on, but I will say I welcome any opportunity for the city to get money that doesn't come from my pocket directly. So when there's state funds that could be going to another municipality to be had, let's do whatever we can to get them. And I don't know if any other members have anything to contribute. You can go ahead and raise your hand now. I'll call on you. Otherwise, we'll move to the next agenda item. Thanks, Jeff, for contributing that item. And thank you, Director DeAndrea, for including it in the packet. If you need anything from me, just give me a shout. And with that, I'll give the floor back to Director DeAndrea to continue with the committee's prior work.
Pardon me, I'm just trying to find the share button here. Oh, here we go. All right, so we're going to, I know at the last meeting we had talked about some of these items, but I don't think we ever actually made, there were no formal motions on these. So we are want to talk tonight again about tipping fees, or at least get some direction from the committee on that. I think there was some discussion on alternatives, but we wanted to reevaluate that or come back to that again. And then the annual increases to the contract pricing. So, and it's my fault, I've mixed these two concepts in the past when we first started our group. So just to reiterate that the waste transfer surcharge is what's collected by the city at the Waste Management Oxford Transfer Station. Because that station is located within the city of Englewood, we're allowed per the municipal code to collect monies from any materials, regardless of the source, that are disposed of at that transfer station. So we receive 50 cents per cubic yard of any of that material from Waste Management back to the city, and that goes into the city's general fund. The tipping fees, which is what I want to talk about with the committee, is so part of that charge, not just the waste transfer fee, but if you were to take something, a load of garbage to the waste management site or out to the facility out near the airport on Tower Road or any other facility, or waste hauler drops something, they are required at the gate to pay a tipping fee. So, and that's typically based on weight or volume, as I say there. And so what we had put in the original RFP was that we were going to exclude that from the pricing that was provided by the haulers in their proposals, and that we would pay that directly to the Oxford transfer station based on the amount of materials that were deposited there. The idea came from a hauler to me, and the idea was that that would prevent Waste Management from modifying their tipping fees or giving them an unfair advantage, perhaps. So I'm not sure if that was an issue necessarily that we heard from Waste Management or from the other provider. So I think just for, we had estimated this, so just guessing, but that the entire city, if we were to go to organized collection, would collect from everybody over a year 10,000 tons, which would equate to $350,000 or an additional cost to the households per month of $3.12. And when we were looking at those total prices, I included this 312. So again, that's just an estimate. If we were to include the tipping fee in the proposal that the waste haulers would provide to us, they would have to estimate this themselves, and they might take it to a different facility other than the Oxford's transfer station, and then we necessarily wouldn't get that 50 cents per ton. But I don't know if that's a big factor in this. And it might be better in the long run to have a better estimate from the haulers, because they might well have a different idea of how this might be serviced, not taking it to Oxford transfer station and getting it just a better handle on this price. So with
Can we
that,
pause for one moment? Maria, Carson has his hand raised.
Sure.
Carson, did you have something?
Yeah, just when we were talking about that last time, I guess maybe it didn't hit the point of a motion, but I know at least it was discussed to put in the RFP to allow them to include the tipping fee or not, because
or not, okay.
that way, if, you know, if one hauler has a weight, you know, I mean, basically it just encourages us getting the best deal as citizens. You know, if they can do a better deal, then great. If not, then, you know, then we'll be able to see what the best deal is. But I mean, I don't see why we wouldn't allow them to do whatever they can do to reduce the cost that goes to us in the deal.
Yeah, that's my recollection as well. I thought we had handled the tipping fee
Okay.
with an either or, allowed either way, basically.
Okay. And that was when I had to drop off, so I apologize. And I did listen to it, but I don't think I was there to participate. And so I may have just misunderstood.
I don't know if there was a motion that we voted on that.
Yeah, I don't think there was. So, but if if the committee is comfortable with that direction, we'll certainly take that back and work that back into the new proposal.
Marcy, you're next.
Hi, Maria. I'm not quite sure how I want to form this question, but just say the single hauler did not work out. Would the city still receive that type of amount that you put up there? I think it was what, 350,000, was it? I mean, what I guess what I'm trying to ask you is if we stayed with what we have, would the city still make the same amount of money if we stayed with, you know, all these haulers, or would they make more with a single trash hauler? I guess that's my question. If
Sure.
That makes sense.
I think we might make a little bit more if we went to an organized collection the way that it was originally written. And that's because we required the haulers in the previous RFP to go to the Oxford transfer station. So we wouldn't necessarily get any of the tipping fees. It would all go there, but because all of the trash now would go to the Oxford station right now, your hauler might take it to another location, you know, somewhere else and out of the city, and therefore we wouldn't get that surcharge. So by requiring it to go to the Oxford station, all of the trash generated within Englewood would go there. And so there's might be an increase in that waste transfer surcharge, but we wouldn't receive any of the tipping fees. That's just something we have to pay.
Thank you for explaining that. I appreciate it.
Christine, go ahead.
Thanks, Director Andrea. Can you help me understand if how we were discussing it before is going to work as far as an RFP and considering the RFP? In other words, respondents would have the ability to either include it or not include it. And are you pretty comfortable that we would be able to sort apples to apples in that case if they don't include it and they don't have another proposed place to take it? Do we insert default values?
Yeah, I'll have to, I think, thank you for that, Member Brinker. I think that was my question, is just trying to think in my head how we might do that. So I think to try and get to that, we'd probably have more of a response that's text to describe how they're going to dispose of the waste, where most of the materials would be taken to, and then basically require all of them. While we can leave that open as to how they do it and where they bring it, we would still want them to estimate that cost for us so that we can compare apples to apples. So regardless of how they do it, there's still going to be a cost. And I think even if we give them that 10,000 ton number to make that even across the board, then how would they estimate those tipping charges for us?
Okay.
Does
Right,
that
great.
make sense?
Yeah.
I think that's it for raised hands. Back to you, Director DeAndrea.
All right. So I think that's, thank you for that additional direction. I appreciate that. And that helped me think through it too. So alternatives, do you recall where we landed here, or do you need more discussion around? I know that had come up as a previous comment or two from the public about offering this to apartment homes, basically anything larger than, you know, what I had originally proposed was going up to triplexes. And that if we had a multifamily dwelling larger than that, it would probably be more of a one of those dumpster types of things. And it would likely require a different type of vehicle, but we could certainly include that in the proposal.
Jeff, you're the first.
So on the multifamily dwellings, I learned some more information on this from Colorado state law today that I think is worth everyone knowing. And I think Director DeAndrea shared that attachment with the whole committee, and it's going to be in the next agenda as part of the public record. But I learned that Colorado state law actually prohibits municipalities from mandating that units, multifamily apartment buildings with 8 or more units, 7 or under, you're good, from mandating what hauler or waste provider they select. Now, many municipalities do, via their code or licensing requirements, require that those multifamily units offer recycling. But I thought it was a pretty important piece of information that Colorado state law prohibits us from forcing units with 8 or more apartments, and probably some other commercial properties as well, from mandating who they select to use for waste services. So you can mandate recycling any number of ways for those facilities, but you can't force 8 or more apartments into what would be essentially a single hauler program based on case law, or based on a statute, which I do not have in front of me. It was 3015. You should have it in your emails, and it'll be a part of the record.
Person.
I had noticed in one of the things Member Fraser sent, it talks about, so it's an I'm not really sure exactly what the background of this is, but the extended producer responsibility, it seemed like it was something that the state is encouraging different municipalities to push towards. And some of the things that stuck out to me on page 23 of that, it said apartments and businesses throw away roughly twice as much waste as single family residents and often lack adequate recycling services. City of Boulder increased its citywide diversion rate by more than 10% since 2015, when the city adopted its universal zero waste ordinance and required recycling and composting services for all businesses and multifamily properties. And then the other part of that, or the other two parts of that that really stood out to me is, so these are Colorado state encouragements toward, at least this is my understanding, and Member Fraser, you might be able to describe that better. But what I got out of this was it was state recommendations to municipalities and counties that are addressing, waste recycling, composting programs. And another big point was to require construction and demolition debris recycling. And then another one was require MMP reporting, which is, there's a standard around the way diversion can be reported, quantities of trash, recycling, composting can be tracked and reported. And there's a whole recommended standard around that. And I don't know, Director DeAndrea, if you're aware of whatever the structure of the MMP state recommended reporting is or not, but that seems like something that if we are moving towards a single hauler type program pushed by Inglewood, we should be thinking about these things that the state is encouraging. And if the bulk of, like, more than twice as much waste and recycling comes from multi-family, or the apartments and businesses, then to me that's all the more reason for us to consider figuring out a way to incorporate those, I guess maybe within the limits of what Member Fraser just told us, of that we can't force more than 7 unit dwellings. But anyway, I think this is all stuff that we need to take into account that's important.
Yeah, Vice Chair Green, I have not read through the document yet, and I'm not familiar with the MMP requirements.
Christine.
So I'm kind of hearing two parts to this. And the first part, I wonder if we could discuss including multifamily buildings with up to 7 units, since that's below that state threshold. And then I'll get to the second part later. The second part being, how can we address multifamily units that are greater than 8? Are there any other options, given that they couldn't be included in a single hauler program? But first of all, I wondered the rest of the committee's thoughts on, should we stick with single family, duplex and triplex, or should it be moved up to 7?
All right, Brenda.
Yeah, in answer to that, if we're talking about multifamilies, keep in mind.
Brenda, can you get
Yeah.
closer to your mic? We're not hearing you.
Okay. Is that better?
Slightly.
Well, okay. Keep in mind that if we go on with multifamily, we're going with a different truck.
I can't hear her.
Okay, I'll call in. I asked you guys if you heard me earlier and y'all said yes.
Yeah, you came through loud and clear earlier. Something else might have changed. Marcy, you're up.
Yeah, I guess this is a question for Member Fraser. I definitely agree that these multi-dwellings should also be included. I guess the limit is 7 from my understanding. But my question is that a lot of people who do rent, don't they pay? I mean, I have a friend who rents, that they have to pay a separate fee for garbage to the management. So I'm just trying to figure out how that would work. But I agree that, I've been to apartments, there's like stuff all over by their bins and sometimes it flows over. So I would agree that they should be included in on this. And so I guess my question is, in a roundabout way, Member Frazier, is how would that work with the tenants? Since they seem to be paying management, or they have some kind of deal with management for their garbage pickup.
So Marcy, just real quick, the last time I rented was in 2003, but
Okay.
trash service was part of the rent. There was no
Oh.
separate. I had to pay for my electricity,
Mhm.
and trash and water were included.
Okay. I'm sorry. I just have a friend that isn't the way it goes, but a lot of apartments are different. So I just wanted to ask that question. That's all. Thank you.
I'm gonna switch back to Brenda.
I think Dane, though, probably had a comment on renting because he said he rented at City Center a few years ago.
I did. So I lived at whatever it used to be called the Alexan at City Center. And they actually had what they called a concierge trash service that they charged you for. Instead of having to take your garbage down to the actual dumpster, they charged you so you could just put your garbage outside your door once a week. And so I'm not sure that they're really charging them for the garbage. They're charging them for essentially a concierge service, kind of a BS thing, but it's not elective. It is a required fee, or it used to be a required fee up until we moved in 2012. So that's a while ago. And that's all I.
Can anybody hear me now? Can you guys hear me now?
Yep.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Sorry about that. It's only ever this meeting. Anyway, hey, I just wanted to bring up about multifamily is keep in mind the two things that have already been discussed tonight. One, it would require a different truck. And two, that there's a lot of wish lists that we're adding on that will increase the cost. And this sounds like a real complicated thing to throw into the mix that could really extend the life of our project too. I would be against adding multifamily dwellings simply because there is so many complications, and it's like you said, we'll be chasing down some landlords, a different truck, and that'll defeat the purpose if we've got different kinds of trucks back out on the street. I mean, there will be anyway, but keep this in mind, is if somebody wins this contract and they've got a lot of the business, they'll be able to offer probably a lower cost because they'll already have trucks there. But I don't think it's our duty to make sure that the apartment people are picking up after themselves either. I mean, I'd love to see that improve, but I just think it's going to make this complicated and more pricey.
Thanks, Brenda. Carson, you're up next.
I mean, we don't know that it would increase the cost. It could actually decrease it by making the overall contract larger. I mean, we haven't seen numbers. I mean, I would like to know if it's absolutely accurate and true. Member Frazier's research on knowing that we can't require multifamily more than 7 units. But I mean, a bulk of the goal of this whole thing is environmental benefits. And if we know that, we know that the number of multifamily dwellings it's massively increased recently. It continues to increase. And if those are the places that produce more than twice the amount of waste and recycling compared to residents, then that's an important factor. And and like I said, the overall contract could make it more increase incentive to give a better deal overall. And personally, I don't, I think that this whole thing is sensitive and something that shouldn't be rushed. I don't feel like we should be in a rush in general to get this done. We should be more focused on doing it as carefully and from the best perspective of service and cost for citizens.
Jeff, and then Dane.
Yeah, so just on a couple points on the law itself. So I found it and pulled it up here. It's Colorado Revised Statutes 3015-401. And the clause I'm looking at is 7A of that, the second paragraph of that, which I'm just stating this for anyone who watches this at home, wants to look at it. It reads, the governmental body, in this case, that would be Englewood, may not compel industrial or commercial establishments or multifamily residences of 8 or more units to use or pay user charges for waste services provided by the governmental body in preference to those services provided by a private person. So that's pretty clear cut on, the 8 units being kind of a hard and fast line as far as mandating participation in, a government contracted or provided single hauler program. Just on the point, and some of the questions raised about apartment and trash services, how that works. It's all
Sorry,
over
Jeff,
the map.
just one moment. Christine, we're hearing the background, so if you could mute.
Sorry about that.
It's all over the map. Basically, landlords can approach it however they want. They can include it in the rent, perhaps charge a premium for the rent. They can charge a flat fee, provided, my understanding is, as long as they're not profiting off of that flat fee, because then they'd be essentially functioning as a utility. They can, say you go coordinated if you're renting like a single family unit, perhaps. I've seen that concierge service trash program at my company from properties that had it existing when we purchased it. Not a good idea when it comes to pests, with everyone putting trash in their hallway and sometimes people putting it out several days early. Don't recommend it at all. But all over the map, I've seen flat fees, I've seen as a part of your entire utility scheme. So it's kind of, there's no one mandated way for how landlords at multifamily units charge for trash. I do think one of the most impactful things, that could be a recommendation if a goal is waste diversion, and I do feel there are a lot of folks who live in apartments who want recycling who don't have it available. If the goal is to increase recycling or perhaps mandate recycling at multifamily units, I think that can be done. Many municipalities have done it. It just wouldn't be via single hauler program. It would be via a code, change in the code, likely. There's one other thing I wanted to mention, but it's escaping my mind. Oh, these seven units, whether we include that or not. Legally, we could go up to a multifamily of 7 units. That probably encompasses a good amount. I know in my area, there's a handful of like 3 apartment unit areas, but I wouldn't, it might be something, I'd be very curious how it would impact the numbers. I could see it potentially increasing it. I could see it potentially decreasing it. That might be a really good question to discuss with haulers when we meet with the haulers. So anyways, sorry for rambling. That's all for now.
Dane, you're next.
So what I was thinking when it comes to this multi-dwelling and even businesses sort of stuff is, because it sounds like we're kind of held off from being able to do that in terms of requiring them to join the single hauler system. maybe what we can do is make a recommendation to council in terms of saying, yes, we want to encourage recycling and we want to encourage businesses to do it. So we want to encourage them to change the statute so that it is mandated by every business of a certain size or really of any multi-dwelling unit that is excluded from the single hauler would be required to recycle at a base minimum type of thing, just as an option. I know it's sort of out of our purview, but I think it's something that we could at least make a recommendation because we are talking about it. And we spent quite a bit of time on this. And I think that's all I have to say.
Thanks. Christine, I think is next.
I wonder if we're ready to discuss a motion with what Dane just said about recommending to city council that they consider requiring multifamily over 8 units and commercial properties. They consider requiring to offer recycling.
I'm going to let Carson have his say first.
Yep.
Well, from one of the things I read, I think it was from one of all the things that Member Fraser sent. And I think the person who presented from EcoCycle mentioned it as well. It doesn't necessarily have to be an ordinance that addresses the businesses and multifamily dwellings. It could be an ordinance that addresses the licensing for the haulers. And I think some of those places, the way they addressed it was they made it so that the licensing for the hauler required that they provide recycling for all customers. And then I think some of the way that was handled is it's just built into the price and then people don't have necessarily a choice on it. So I think that there's a couple of different ways to approach that. And I guess if we were going to make a recommendation for city council to consider making that a requirement, I mean, they could investigate options on that, whether it's a change to the requirements for licensing, which I would think would be easier to implement than a new, a new law that, creates new requirements for all of the businesses and multifamily dwelling.
Dane, your hand is still up. Did you have something to add?
No, I just forgot to lower it. Sorry.
It's all right. Just making sure. Christine, I'm going to kick the ball back to you.
Okay. How about a motion that we recommend to city council that they require multifamily and commercial properties to offer recycling? Did that come out right?
I'll second that. Could I offer a friendly amendment to that?
Please, my brain's a little fried today.
No worries. I would just say exactly what Christine said, in that city council would require that recycling be mandatory in multifamily dwellings via whatever mechanism they see most appropriate, whether that be licensing or code changes.
Yeah.
And just a point of clarification, Christine, did you say multifamily and commercial?
I did, but I would be willing to discuss that with the committee because we've mainly been discussing multifamily up to this point.
If I can make a comment on that, I would say we stick to multifamily right now because commercial opens up a whole host of industrial and other issues that we may not be prepared to deal with.
Okay, good call. Just multifamily.
Carson, you have your hand raised?
Yeah, but you can go ahead and they can finish this out first. Sorry.
All right, so there's a motion on the floor that's been seconded. Director DeAndrea, did you get that motion?
I did.
Good. That's impressive.
So we'll, if you would go ahead and call the roll, we'll take a vote.
Okay. Vice Chair Green,
Yes.
Member Frazier,
Yes.
Member Brinker,
Yes.
Member Borman,
Yes.
Member Brown,
I'm going to abstain.
Member Labe,
Yes.
Member Hubka,
Yes.
and Member Kawanabe.
Yes.
And finally, Chair Ward.
No.
So that motion passes 7-1 with 1 abstention.
Thank you. Carson?
I guess I had one question on that. I think that, I mean, it was kind of broken up as it was described, but Director DeAndrea, did that end up being specifically for multifamily 8 units or more?
No, my understanding, oh, yes, excuse me, for all multifamilies, but not commercial. So it's my understanding from the discussion is that we do have the ability to, through like a code change or licensing, which the motion says whatever, you know, would be best for the city, that would require all multifamily is the way I understood that.
Okay, because the other thing I was wondering is, since our discussion of whether we should include multifamily dwellings as part of the RFP kind of revolves around how many, I mean, is it possible that there's enough up to 7 unit dwellings for that to be a factor, you know, one way or the other? And do you have a sense of how many there are beyond? Because your numbers that you've given us are based on up to 3 units, right?
Yeah, I got that from our community development department. They had they got that back to me. So I'm assuming they might have a breakdown of that up to 7 units. I can certainly ask.
So I would suggest that we find out how many units there are in Inglewood between, you know, 3 and 7 before we even decide on whether we're going to include multifamily dwellings in the RFP or not.
Christine?
Vice Chair Green, I'd be curious your thoughts on if it was either a high number or a low number, how that might change your thinking either way, just out of curiosity.
I would think if it's a high number, that would be, to me, that would lean towards figuring out a way to include it, because if it's a high number, then it could very well, first, it's more trash and recycling that we can potentially improve, you know, environmental numbers around. And secondly, it could be enough that it actually incentivizes the provider to, because it's a bigger contract, and, you know, to give a better deal overall. But if there's not many, then it wouldn't make sense.
Kanji?
Yeah, I was just wondering if we're keeping a list of the questions that we're going to be asking these haulers, because I think this would be one of those points of inquiry to them. And my vote would be dependent upon their answer to that, right? Because I'd assume that some of these haulers are already servicing some of these multifamily units, so they're already equipped to do that.
In response to that question, if you recall, Member Kawanabe, we had created a list of questions that the two proposal respondents had responded to in writing. So we can dust those off and certainly add this one to that.
That'd be awesome. Thank you.
And personally, I'm kind of looking forward to an open discussion with the haulers when they come in. At least that's my vision for it. Some opportunity to kind of openly discuss some questions and hear from them on what we may or may not be doing that might complicate the project a little bit. Christine?
So it sounds like we're putting aside this question until we get more data on how many buildings there are that have between 4 and 7 units, and then also pending a discussion with the haulers to kind of get a sense of the cost savings versus cost expenditures. Is that right?
That's my impression, with the exception of the recycling issue that we just voted on.
Right, right. And it sounds like we're leaving commercial aside just totally, which makes sense.
Carson,
I would say that that should be on our list of questions for talking to the haulers too. I mean, I get that there, that there's probably a massive amount of complication around dealing with commercial, but it'd be nice to hear what their responses are in regard to that too, because they're probably the same ones servicing them now, and hearing their response, whether it's biased or not, as to whether inclusion of that could potentially make a better deal overall would be interesting.
But it did sound like from Jeff's research that we could not include commercial of any size in single hauler.
Oh, yeah,
It
okay.
could be included in the other part of either encouraging or requiring them to offer recycling, but not in the single hauler part.
I mean,
That's my read of the statute, at least.
and I mean, I don't know if this is possible or not, or if this makes any sense, but I mean, if that's about requiring it, what about having it be and offering it available as part of a larger deal, but not preventing them from doing something separate? But if we had one big deal that was, providing the best deal for, residences, as multifamily dwellings, commercial, because it's a giant, pool of customers, that could potentially, without excluding commercial businesses or larger multifamily dwellings from doing their own thing separate, which wouldn't that get around the legal requirement if we're not forcing them to use something, but by offering it as an available thing within, this overall pool of customers, potentially a better deal?
Yeah, like an opt-in.
Yes, that's legally permissible, absolutely, under the statute. You just can't say you have to do this.
So it feels like that would be a worthy discussion to have with the haulers and get feedback from them on whether they would be inclined or interested in offering a better deal overall for including, multifamily dwellings of all sizes and businesses of all sizes.
Kanji.
Tangential, but related to the meetings. I'm wondering if we've got this list of questions, if we would have wanted to reach out to the haulers and ask if they've got questions for us, just so that we can get a pre-read on that and start that discussion.
I think that would be helpful. Director Deandra.
Yeah, and I do want to set a little time aside at the very end of the meeting. That's on our new business as well, to just talk about the logistics around those interviews. But yes, definitely when I reach out to them and invite them to participate, that I can ask them for any questions for us that we can be contemplating and be able to respond to or ready to respond to.
Sounds good. Does anybody have anything else to contribute on this subject? Seeing no hands raised, we can go on to the next.
All right, great. So it's maybe been about, I think it was in mid January, I reached out to some of the other communities near and around us just to see how they had structured their annual increases. So you can see here that of the 5 communities, a lot of them are set similar to us with some nuances. So you can see here, the Edgewater used the consumer price index for the urban consumer. So that was the water, sewer, and trash collection US city average. So I think that was what one of our respondents was referring to, is they preferred that measure. And it was the lesser of that number, or 3% annually. Lakewood was 2.5% per year increase. And this was interesting, up to a maximum of 5% over the 5-year contract period. So they're setting a top end of that 5-year. Now, again, Lakewood has not moved forward with service, but that was the way they had structured their proposal initially. So that did not go through with their city council. So they're still going back to the drawing board, if you will, on offering organized collection. Golden has offered it for a number of years. They're getting ready to modify or go out for new proposals either later this year or early 2022. And they had the lesser of the 3% of the CPI, which Denver, Boulder, Greeley, which is a different CPI. We were using the Denver, Aurora, Lakewood one, similar to Sheridan. And then each of the 3 increases during that 3-year period were approved at 3%. So they never used the CPI because it sounds like it was higher than the 3%. Arvada, which passed last June, they had put in there the lesser of the Denver, Boulder, Greeley, similar to Greenwood or Golden, or 3.5%, and then had that cap again of 8% over their 7-year contract. And then Sheridan, the first 2 years were basically no increases. And then years 3 through 5 of their 5-year contract was the lesser of 3% or the Denver, Aurora, Lakewood CPI. So this was very similar to the way I worded it, except for not the first 2 years were set. So lots of nuance there, as you can imagine. So just going to open that up again for discussion. Is going back to this, should we consider keeping it at the Denver, Aurora, Lakewood CPI, going to this urban consumer idea? And then would there be, is it the lesser of one of those and then doing some sort of cap or that maximum? So I'll turn it back to Chair Ward for discussion.
Awesome. Carson.
I mean, I guess I'm curious as to how it's automatically assumed it has to go up. This meeting, when you guys were discussing this, was when I was really sick, and I listened to it, and I appreciated that Member Fraser brought up pushing for the lower increase rate. I mean, you know, if there's a recession or a crash or, you know, anything like, does CPI, I don't know much about CPI. Does it always go up? Does it indefinitely just go up? And why are we automatically doing increases? And I definitely think we should do a cap, but I wonder if, you know, like if there was some massive recession or whatever, and then our contract says it's going up, it just doesn't make sense to me. I don't understand why we're automatically raising it.
Jeff, you're next.
Yeah, so I agree a cap is a good idea. I have negotiated a number of private trash hauling contracts, anywhere from 3 to 7 years in different states across the country. And from a number of different haulers, I've seen 3% as a pretty consistent number. I don't believe any of those have been chained to CPI, but my understanding is, at least for the last decade minimum, CPIs have been increasing pretty rapidly, and some of these costs could go up, especially if we, you know, find ourselves in an inflation environment, even higher. And to me, that's what I see, which is entirely likely if we, especially with trillions of dollars being spent potentially, that we end up in a situation like that. That's what I honestly see, capping these increases as one of the biggest benefits of this program. Because yeah, you could have a hauler offer you whatever it may be, $12 for your introductory offer right now as an individual. They can jack it up to 30 next month or next year with zero repercussions. So you may have a good rate now, but you have nothing at all dictating that that's going to stick for the long term, which we have an opportunity to do here.
Christine?
My 2 cents, but if that's indexed to inflation, it's probably 3 cents by now, is that I think it makes sense to tie it to inflation rather than a so-called arbitrary amount. I would think the CPI for urban consumer, the water, sewer, and trash collection services, because that seems the most tied to the reality of costs that they're actually facing. This doesn't give them the opportunity to just jack up the cost at will. It ties it to what's actually happening out in the economy. So I would lean slightly towards that one, or at the very least, just the regular CPI. And my thought on that, I could be convinced otherwise, but my thought is that if we cap it at, 2.5% or something, 3%, that the providers would cover themselves through higher ongoing rates, monthly rates per household. And I'd rather see those rates lowered and see, their actual costs for providing that, and then their actual cost increases based on reality.
Jane?
Yeah, I guess I do think we need to try and have some sort of maximum, because if you start saying 3% per year, especially if we end up going with like a 10-year sort of thing, and that compounds 3%, 3%, 3%, it can go up pretty substantially. So I do think we need to cap it, especially with these longer term contracts. My only one concern is that, if we say 3% cap and the maximum is 8, is the first 3 years, they're going to up it by the maximum that they can and just let that go over time. And, maybe somebody else can speak to that in terms of like, maybe we should try and lock in our price initially for 2 years, like the Sheridan setup. And then I'm not sure what to do with the urban consumer versus CPI. I definitely think we should lock in the lesser of two numbers, but I guess I'm not sure either which way to go with CPI versus urban consumer index.
Thanks. Brenda, you're next.
Hi, yeah, so I thought we were going to talk about this, like, I think in January when I did all my research on CPI. So it's not as fresh in my head right now, but, the consumer price index is a common among almost all city contracts I've read. And one of the, it's based on consumer goods and services that go up with inflation every year. So it's kind of like saying we're going to give this trash guy a job, and then he gets a raise, because he should, over time make more money as wages, as costs go up for consumer goods. So this is a fair thing for us to do. I don't see them raising the price just because they can, because they will have a contract. And we're kind of doing this pay as you go right now on those bin prices. So we're kind of set on that. I agree. I like the way Maria had it written anyway about the 3% sounded fine. We have to expect that we'll pay more for groceries and services over time. So I'm really pretty agreeable into any of these that you all want to do, although I think that Sheridan one does seem the most attractive, and I would use the CPI. I don't know, there's two. There's also a CPI that the Waste Management Company, I thought, I tried to look it up, a CPI specifically for waste management. I tried to find it, and I think I might have, but it didn't seem to be much different than overall CPI for all consumer goods and services. But anyway, I'd say we just pick one that y'all like.
Thanks, Brenda. Now's a good time to talk about management of raised hands. There are 3 hands still raised, so 2. So I'll weigh in here, just putting on my budgetary wonk hat briefly. I'm a big fan of the CPI. I'm no economist, but it seems to establish a fairly fair method of ensuring that rates can go up at a fixed level and a reasonable level. And I think everybody benefits, because when we enter the contract, we know that the rate is going to increase, but we also know by how much. Looking back at some previous contracts that the city's entered into on a long-term basis, the Denver Fire contract is probably the best example of this. It had a provision that allowed the rate to ratchet each year for 20 years. But every year, all the way through to year 20, we know exactly how much we're paying for fire department services in our city. So I like CPI. Marcy.
Yeah, I'm kind of more on the cautious side here. Who knows if we're going to have a recession? I don't know how much longer this economy can stand of all the raising of prices and everything that the government is doing right now. So, boy, I just really am in a quandary here, because on one hand, I certainly agree with Vice Chair Green that anything could happen in the next year or 2. So I say err on the cautious side. And I mean, people are losing their jobs right now. And I don't even know if they're going to be okay with even a 3% raise. So that's just my opinion. Thank you.
Yeah, so just an FYI, Marcy, the CPI is the Consumer Price Index, and it is based on the rate of inflation. So if the economy slows, what we tend to have is deflation, which means that the CPI would be low, as opposed to increasing at a flat rate on an annual basis.
But Chair Ward, if that is and I understand that, but if that does happen and we've signed a contract at 3% or higher or whatever, and we all decide to do, does that CPI go down? Or are we locked into a contract at 3% or higher?
So on the screen right now, you'll see the way other cities do it. And a number of them have the lesser of CPI or 3% fixed. So in the event that we were experiencing an economic collapse and we had massive deflation, the CPI would be less than 3% theoretically, which would then make the number for the increase less than the 3%.
Okay, thanks for explaining that. I appreciate it.
Christine, you're next.
Any of these are consumer protection method. So we can't go too wrong, because right now companies can increase that however much they want to. This at least limits or sets the term for how much they can increase it and ties it to inflation, which is to say ties it to how the economy is actually happening now, at least the CPI ones. But then next, I wanted to see if we could get Director Andrea's opinion on this, just personally after having looked at how other cities do it, etc.
I think, nothing clearly stood out to me. I do like the idea of adding a maximum in there. And so if we were to go to either a 7 or a 10-year contract, doing something that sets a maximum for that. So again, to Chair Ward's point, we could actually calculate each year what the higher end would be. But really, I think I could be comfortable with any of these options in terms of either the CPI, or, you know, either for a local kind of a thing, Denver, Boulder, Greeley, or the Denver, Aurora, Lakewood, or going with this urban consumer option. And I think either way, what we would do for the CPI is list the website and the location where we would check this. So there's no question about like, oh, well, I'm seeing this number, you know, or this number. And so we would actually define the location where so we're on the same page. And then I think it's really up to you, you know, what's that balance? Is it 3% or 2.5% like Lakewood? I guess so. What I'm saying is, I think we could go anyway.
Kanji.
Yeah, this is a question for anybody actually, but what's the differential between the CPI for the urban consumer versus metropolitan areas versus like Denver, Boulder, Greeley? Is it a big split?
I have not looked up the urban consumer one, but I did check the CPI for another contract that we had that was worded similarly for the Denver, Aurora, Lakewood CPI. And last year it was 3.1.
Awesome, thank you.
I can look real quick while we're talking for the urban consumer one. I can search for that.
I looked at CPIs recently and they were all very similar. I mean, they do vary, and you have some sectors that are, you know, inordinately affected by something where there's a massive jump, but generally it's a chart with a bunch of numbers that look like 2.3, 3.2, you know, 4, you know, 1.5. So not a tremendous range usually. Christine?
I was interpreting that the CPI for Denver, Boulder, Greeley would be essentially all prices for whatever you're buying. Say you're buying a Big Mac or you're buying gas, but that the urban consumer one was specific to water, sewer, and trash nationwide. Is that true? So it seemed like they were a CPI for just getting a slightly different subset of prices.
Yeah, so the way I understand it works, and I've just poked around a little bit in the public data, is, you know, there are regions and there are categories. So there's a general, which is across all the categories, and then there are special categories, and the consumer price index may vary based on the general geographic location as well. So the Bureau of Labor Statistics calculates a national one across all sectors. And then if you want to dig down deep, you know, maybe the California economy is different than the economy in Maryland. So you might see some differences there.
They don't have, say, urban consumer for Denver, Boulder, Greeley. They don't have sector specific and location specific. I guess not.
There's a lot of granularity to the data. It just depends on which granules you want to pick up. So yeah, there's combinations. It's a pretty interesting website. I think the Bureau of Labor Statistics.
What are you leaning towards offhand?
Probably Denver Metro CPI would be what I would choose, just in general, so that the rate moves more in accordance with the way other things are moving.
Do you want to make a motion along that regard after Vice Chair Green?
I do not, but Vice Chair Green is up, so I'll call on him.
I mean, I was just going to throw out potentially even having it be among all three, the CPI for urban consumer or 3%, or, you know, the lesser of that, or Denver, Aurora, Lakewood CPI or 3% annually. Then we're just taking into account all three of them on the lesser. I don't know what we would put in as a cap. I think doing a cap is a good idea, but it seems like that would depend on the length of the contract we end up with. So I don't know if we would say, you know, cap at this amount, if it's a 5-year, this amount, if it's a 7, this amount, if it's a 10, like it seems like we kind of would have to take into account that overall length.
Christine's next.
The inflation rate, the CPI, essentially is its own cap because how much inflation is how much inflation is. And that's the most that they could do. And if we put a cap of some certain amount, then the trash haulers to cover themselves will just put higher monthly rates per household. That's a worry of mine.
Dane,
I guess I feel like we should just decide. And just make a motion because I think we're just kind of going around in circles. I was just going to suggest that we set our cap as if for each of the contract lengths for 5% for 5 years, 7% for 7 years, and 10% for 10 years. And I don't remember if we went beyond that in terms of length, but I think we ought to cap the annual per year at 3%, cap that at a maximum or CPI or 3%, and a maximum based on the length of the contract that is essentially equal to the number of years, 5 for 5, 7 for 7, 10 for 10.
But if you had the lower of those two, wouldn't that be just 1% for each of those years?
Yes. Yeah, I'm not sure exactly how that would work out, because I kind of think if it's 3% and the actual CPI goes up every year by 3%, in theory, we could hit that, over a 10-year period, we could hit it in 4 years. And, that's if everything goes bonkers, CPI is up, 3% is our cap per year. In theory, we could hit 10% in 4 years, but it would stay then for the next 6 if we went till 10-year contract. But at least we'd be limiting ourselves at some point, because I don't know. I just don't know how else to limit it.
I have a question for Director DeAndrea. Do we have boilerplate language that we generally add to city contracts when we're doing this type of thing?
It's really up to the individual department how they want to structure this. We do sometimes get input from finance, but I would say it's pretty, we haven't created one where there's a maximum. So if we're comparing it to CPI, it's typically Denver, Aurora, Lakewood CPI or the lesser of 3%. That's
All right.
what we've typically done.
Carson, you're next.
I like what Member Borman suggested. That makes sense and seems like a structure that would work. I would just put in my 2 cents that I do think that the way Sheridan did it with, the first 2 years being a set price so that it's not increased right away. I think that's a good, I would like to see that. I'd like to see, whatever price they're giving us be fixed for at least, if it's 10 years, I wonder if that shouldn't be 3, but a fixed price for at least the first couple years. And then with the increases, as we've discussed with the caps, like Member Borman said, to me seems the most reasonable.
Sounds like we're getting warmer. We've got a couple more hands raised. Marcy?
Yeah, probably no one's going to agree with me on this, but my feeling is, aren't we kind of jumping the gun here a little bit, because we don't know how long the contract is going to be, right? We haven't said, is it going to be 2, 5, 10 years? And wouldn't that kind of make a difference once we have figured out how long this contract is going to be before we make this decision?
It does, but we need to tell the haulers likewise what type of a proposal we expect to receive from them in response to the RFP. And this would be one of the pricing elements that they would be required to adhere to in whatever proposal they send to us. Jeff?
Yeah, so I think that's kind of exactly what we're discussing, what Member Green and Boardman are hitting on here. I think my recollection is that we've asked the haulers to provide bids for 5, 7, and 10-year intervals. Is that correct? I believe.
That was
and
my
I like-
understanding too, or recollection.
I like the idea, as Member Green was mentioning. We're on the same wavelength today, by the way, of these 2-year or year initial price guarantees. You know, I think there's a way you could structure that for, you know, maybe 2 years for a 5-year, maybe 2 to 3 years for a 7-year, and maybe 3, even 4 years, probably maxing it at 3, because otherwise you might be juicing up your initial rate. But I think there's a combination of that combined with, I think the lesser of 3% or CPI is a reasonable measure, because if that recession hits and CPI goes down, then you'll get the lesser and have that as your option for non-rate guaranteed years. I don't know what the reasonable level of a rate guarantee or how many years is getting a little starting to impact just your initial rate overall. But I agree with Member Borman. We shouldn't lose sight of that right now. These haulers can jack up your rates 50% next month if they wanted to, unless you are in a locked in contract. And even when that contract ends, which I have not seen anything that's beyond a year, they can do it then. So we're getting some, at least, you know, anticipation of what prices would look like in the future here by potentially locking in a longer contract.
Brenda, our contracts expert, do I detect a motion coming?
I'm not gonna make a motion, just me, I'm not a contract expert on CPI, that's for sure. It's none of mine. But I will just offer that the hauler's biggest cost is probably going to be fuel. And we can guess, just based historically, on what's going to happen to fuel over the next 5, 7, or 10 years. It's probably going to go up, and it's probably going to go up more than 3%. So I think 3%, lesser or 3%, is right where we need to hit. And also, and by keeping it at 3%, I'm hoping that this will incentivize our haulers to go with an electric vehicle, because then they would really enjoy not having the cost of that fuel. So I don't have a motion because I don't know which one of these to pick. If I had to pick something, I would say the way Maria had it, or whatever Steve says. So I don't know. You guys are going to have to do this.
I have a motion.
All right, so we've got a couple others. Jeff, I still see your hand raised, but I suspect you forgot to put it down. And Christine is next.
Can I make a motion that we copy Sheridan's?
So moved. Is there a second?
Can I make a friendly amendment with a cap of equal to the percentage in terms of number of years that the contract is in length?
I'm not sure about that, because that seems so much less than the general inflation rate of somewhere around 3%. That seems like that would be somewhere around 1%. So I'm not sure about that, but maybe you could put a next motion after this one for that.
Okay.
Would that work?
Still waiting for a second.
Well,
Oh,
wait, I was going to second this and just point out that this is an annual contract increase. And that's, I don't know how to get out of writing the language like that unless Maria knows. But it's an annual contract increase is what we're voting on, regardless of whether it's 5, 7, or 10 years. And all the other cities are, like you said, I would I will just go ahead and make a motion that we go with, or just second the motion on Sheridan that Christine said. There.
So the motion that's been moved by member Brinker and seconded by member Hubka is to adopt the Sheridan model in the RFP, which is the first 2 years set an initial price and increases in years 3 through 5 at the lesser of 3% or the Denver Aurora Lakewood Consumer Price Index. Maria, when you're ready, you can call the roll.
Vice Chair Green,
No, but because I want to have a cap.
Member Frazier,
Yes.
Member Brinker,
Sure.
Member Borman,
Yes, but I want a cap too.
Member Brown, Marcy,
Yes, I'm sorry, no.
no. Member Lade,
Yes.
Member Hubka,
Yes,
Member Quannaby,
No, I'd like to add a cap as well.
and Chair Ward.
Yes.
So that motion passes 6 in favor, 3 against.
All right, so that covers the portion on annual increases to contract pricing. I think, Maria, now would be a good time to move over to scheduling, although I do see a couple of raised hands at the moment. So let's handle those first. Christine?
I don't think that last vote meant that we couldn't then vote on a cap. So I think someone could add a motion for a cap if they felt like it.
well, I guess I don't understand. I thought 3% is the cap.
Yeah, hold off on that, Brenda. Carson has his hand raised.
Yeah, in response to member Brinker saying that it seemed like it was only 1% a year, it's cumulative though. And that's why like on the Arvada, they've got a cap total of 8% over 7 years. Because if they do push that up in the first year or the second year, I mean, it's a cumulative increase. So it's not just 1%, it's a lot. That's why I feel like, so I would like to make a motion that we add the cap that member Borman recommended of at, if it's a 5-year contract, 5%, if it's a 7-year contract, 7%, if it's a 10-year contract, 10% with what currently stands.
I second that.
Second.
So can we pause for a moment here? Because I think we might risk getting a little convoluted in what we're asking for. And if we go with the Sheridan model, which is first 2 years set an initial price, and then we cap total increase at 5% in 5 years, that means the first, in year 3, they increase by 3%. In year 4, they don't have the option to increase by 3% again because they would hit the 5% cap. So these two motions seem contradictory to me.
It's the max they can go up. They don't have to go up in that 3rd year or the 4th year. But yeah, once they hit 5, if they can justifiably based on CPI, the lesser of 3% or CPI go up, then, but once they hit 5%, then it's done on a 5-year. Once they hit 7 it's done on 7. And once it hit 10, it's done on 10, whenever they get to that based on the lesser of 3 or CPI.
So what I would propose is that we reconsider the previous motion so that we can, instead of stacking two things on top of each other that may not necessarily fit together, get a motion that matches both of these demands and is clear to both staff, the haulers, and me, actually.
That sounds good. And sorry for any confusion I added.
So I'm going to move to reconsider the previous motion. And I'll need,
I can second that. Steve, you muted though.
so we have an item that's moved and seconded. I'll need the mover or the seconder to withdraw that motion so that we can reconsider the previous motion instead in order to comply with parliamentary procedure.
Sure, I can remove it.
I think Carson was the one who moved the cap.
Yeah,
That's the motion on the table right now.
Oh,
Carson,
sorry.
are
Oh,
you willing to
okay,
withdraw that?
sure. I'll remove that so that the goal is we're going to try and redo the whole thing.
Yes. So if
Okay.
you'll withdraw your motion for the cap.
I
we can move
withdraw
on
my
to
motion
reconsider.
for the cap.
So now I'm going to move that we reconsider the previous motion, which was the Sheridan model. And instead of adopting the Sheridan model, what I will propose is that we take the Sheridan model, which is first 2 years at a fixed price, increases in 3 to 5, capped at the lesser of 3% for the Denver Aurora Lakewood Consumer Price Index, with a maximum total increase in 5 years of 5%, 7 years of 7%, and 10 years of 10%, which essentially combines the two motions
Second.
into one. And I want to make sure that Director DeAndrea is tracking with us because we're still a little convoluted in this process.
I did get that.
Okay, so I'll be the movant and Carson has the second on this. So this will be a reconsideration with the replacement motion. And Director DeAndrea, when you're ready, you can call the roll on this.
Vice Chair Green,
Yes.
Member Frazier,
Yes.
Member Brinker,
No,
Member Borman,
Yes.
Member Brown,
Yes.
Member Labe,
yes,
Member Hubka,
Yes,
Member Quannaby,
Yes.
and Chair Ward.
Yes.
Okay, that motion passes 8 in favor, 1 against.
All right. Does anybody else have anything to consider on rates? Rate increases, that is. I don't see any raised hands. Oh, Carson?
We just, one question, since you didn't specify it in your motion, did we go with the, oh no, I guess we did. It was the Denver Aurora Lakewood CPI, not the urban consumer pricing one, right?
I think I just said CPI, but that was the intent. Yes.
Okay. That was my only question. Thanks.
All right. So Director DeAndrea, I think now is a good time for us to discuss the scheduling matters,
Okay,
as we have about 8 minutes left in our regularly scheduled meeting time.
yeah, so I'll call that up. So I did put together a schedule just briefly here to look at. I'm going to share that. Where'd that go now? Oh, here it is. Okay. And I'll try and make this larger. So our plan, excuse me. Our plan was to potentially invite the waste haulers in on March 8th. So that would be 2 weeks from yesterday. I was thinking that we were going to get through all of the discussion. We still haven't gotten through the policy items, which there were about, let's look here, I'll just pull up that presentation. So we still have to talk about the administrative fee, the use of collected penalties, and dive a little bit into that senior citizen low income program. Given that, so we could either do this in 2 weeks and then postpone the meetings with go back to the schedule here. So we could then push the meetings with the waste haulers out 2 further weeks, so March 22nd. And then instead on March 8th, talk about these policy issues. And then over these next few weeks, that would allow me to kind of finalize the draft for your review to get that back to the committee. With the hope then, and this would also then give us more time, maybe at the next meeting also to formulate those questions. I can put that list together. The one thing I would like to know is just, do you want to have all the haulers in the same meeting, or do you want to have like a half an hour with each one who responds? But now we're basically under 2 weeks. So I would mail, letters out, and it might be kind of short at this point. So I would recommend that we use the March 8th meeting to talk about the policy issues. And then on March 22nd, actually have the meeting with the waste haulers and talk to them about questions that we might have. And I'll leave it up to you to discuss if you want to talk with them individually or as a group.
All right, couple of raised hands. Marcy was the first.
Yeah, thank you. I agree with Director DeAndrea that can we move this to the 22nd? I think there's a lot to talk about with policy and maybe forming our questions. And as far as meeting with the other haulers, I don't know, I'll go along with what the group wants.
Jeff?
Yeah, I'm fine with that as well. As for, I don't think we should have a free for all where all the haulers are meeting with us all at once. I think that would not be as productive as separating out different haulers meeting with us. So we can focus on one at a time and kind of compare and contrast a little bit easier.
Brenda?
Yeah, these meetings are public, so I don't want I agree with Jeff. We don't want the trash haulers all on the same call, competing for different answers and trying to vie for our business. Really, the first one who goes to speak, everybody else will be able to hear them because these meetings are public, so they'll be at a disadvantage. But yes, let's please, I like the schedule. This is fine on the 22nd. Let's start with one hauler at a time. We have like 3, don't we? 2? I don't know. That sounds good.
I like the 22nd as well. A couple of notes on these hauler meetings. Oftentimes, the people who respond to these are members of the sales staff or the public policy staff, and they have presentations that they want to give. My preference would be to keep those as short as possible, and to have as much time as possible for open dialogue. If they have written materials that they haven't already submitted, they should feel free to submit those to the committee before the meeting. But I think time would be spent most productively just with a sort of a Q&A. And Kanji?
I agree with that. And half an hour is going to fly by with each one of these. I think my suggestion there would be to give them the questions ahead of time in priority order, so that we can get, if they want to send the written responses, then we can have that discussion about those responses.
Thank you. My suspicion is that we'll probably hear some things from haulers about some of the things that we've already voted on and why they might make responding to the new RFP more difficult. And that's what I'm most interested in hearing. Anybody else have any comments on hauler meetings? I think we may have consensus to set those for the 22nd. Any objection? Raise your hand. Yeah, Maria, so let's go ahead and do the 22nd for those hauler meetings.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and I think, half an hour each, and prearrange those times, and we'll ask them to limit or have no presentation, and any presentation materials can be provided in advance, which will be provided to the applicants or to the committee members. So at the next meeting on March 8th, I'll bring back that list of questions and add an agenda item so that you can debate of what we want to send to them in advance so that they can prepare.
All right, Christine, you have your hand raised.
Thanks. I have to probably miss the meeting on March 8th. So I'm glad that that's not the one we're discussing with the haulers, but forewarned, I'll be gone then. But if we do discuss the remaining policy items on the 8th, one thing we had left on our list was the use of penalties. And I think we discussed that one already, maybe when Director Andrea was out. But I also had a further thought on the penalty, so I'm sorry I'm going to miss it on the 8th. Do you want me to bring up my thought right now on use of the penalties?
Not really.
Okay.
It's not
That's
on the
fine.
agenda right now. So what I would suggest is if you can't attend that meeting and you have something to share with the committee, use the same method that we've been using and just email it to the clerk and have it
Okay.
put it in the packet.
Great, will do.
Dane?
Yeah, I was actually just gonna ask Director DeAndrea to try and start to synthesize all of our motions into what the RFP will look like so that we can give that to the haulers. And just like you were talking about, Chair Ward, get them to be able to give us some feedback on what we've already come up with. And if they look at it and go, kind of like the large item pickups that they didn't even really address in the last RFP, I want to know ahead of time and see if we even want to put that out in our RFP, or if it's something we are, this is an absolute must sort of thing. And that way we can discuss it before we actually send out the RFP. I don't know, just a thought.
I do think a lot of them have probably been following what we've been doing so far, but having that information would certainly be helpful. And I believe we saw an overview of that in our last meeting's packet. See no harm in repeating that.
Yeah, can certainly, we'll update that with these new motions and have that in the agenda packet, and then have a question to some effect of, here's the, things that the committee has already recommended. Please be prepared to speak to these where you think there might be additional costs or the elements that the committee hasn't considered or something like that.
Thank you.
Other scheduling issues to address, Director DeAndrea?
Nope, this is a fluid, so was just trying to give you a timeline there of when we might be looking at some sort of action. So we are tentatively scheduled also on April 12th to bring this back, our recommendations to council based on all of the discussion. So that date is still fluid, so don't feel like we have to meet that. But at least it gives you some sort of a timeline, because we do want to look at, if we were to move forward, we don't want to implement the containers in the field over the winter time. So I think we're laid out fairly well here that we would be hitting next spring if we were to move forward. And if we moved out even a little bit further, then we're hitting the summer and fall months. So I think we're still good there. I think one of the other considerations when we do go back to council with the RFP recommendations is we would also bring up for consideration by the city council is, do they want to consider this as a ballot initiative in the fall? Because that decision, I believe, would need to be made about June or July of this year to get it on the November ballot.
All right.
All right.
Well,
Thank you.
think that fills out the scheduling discussion. I'll just move on. I believe, have members' choice at the end of this agenda. Does anybody have anything to contribute at this time for members' choice? Raise your hand. All right, I don't see any hands. I just have one thing under Chairman's choice. We've been doing pretty well maintaining order in these meetings. I just want to make sure that for the sake of keeping everything from descending into chaos, it's really important to use the raise hand function. This is a large panel. And I don't want to be addressing interruptions or other things like that if that can be avoided. So as much as possible, if we can adhere to the rules, that would be awesome. And I think that's everything. So I'll see you all in 2 weeks. It's 8:04 and this meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Night all. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, guys. It was great. Woo.